Ori, thank you so much. There's time briefly for a few questions. We've got about 10 minutes or so that we can allow for questions. So if you have one or two, please just raise your hand and we'll take them.
Anyone? Come on, you chickens. No questions? Not even you, Rosemary? No, I don't want to put you on the spot. Oh, I won't. I love putting you on the spot.
Oh, well. I think we're all bowled over by expertise.
Yeah. Look, it's a fascinating, does everybody agree? It's just a totally fascinating, it's a fascinating conversation and a fascinating group of thoughts that you have stimulated, I guess. Have you looked at these ideas in a wider sphere of art? I'm sure you have, but I want to ask you where they are. Briefly.
Sure. One of the courses that I'm not teaching currently, but have taught probably a dozen times at Georgetown is called Problem of God, where I start out by saying, why is it called Problem of God? Is God the problem or are we the problem? Anyway, we then engage in a coverage that extends from a look at the Hesiod's Theogony and some passages from the Iliad, so the Greeks, to Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, their basic texts, Bible, Quran, and then, of course, everyone who's on this side of the fence thinks that those on that side of the fence are defined only by those texts. So all Muslims are guided only by the Quran, all Jews are only guided by the Torah, all Christians are only guided by the Gospels. And then you realize, no, there's all of that interpretive literature, which actually is what defines these traditions. And we move on from those to some of the secular thinkers, from Descartes to Kant to Nietzsche. And we move on from there to look at the Bhagavad Gita, which is one of the important, the central Krishnite text within that vast compendium that we inaccurately refer to as Hinduism. We read the Dhammapada, which is a very important early text for Buddhism. We read some material from native North American traditions. So we cover a pretty wide, we end up reading, what's his name, Sam, the secularist, the atheist, thank you, Sam Harris, whom I met once at a party, and I was pointed out as a theologian. He makes a beeline to me. I said, no, I'm not a theologian. I teach theology. I'm not a theologian. And he went on about a 15-minute rant, nonstop, on how religion is responsible for all of the problems in the world. And when he paused for breath, I said, Sam, you sound like a fundamentalist. Which, of course, he did, and he is. So we cover a fairly wide range, and we look primarily at literary sources, but yes, I have absolutely explored visual terms of this thinking across the planet, I guess I would have to say. Yeah. Richard.
Ori, we find in history, religious history, intolerance of other religions. Only I have the truth, the way to God, through Jesus Christ, through Muhammad. Right now we have a recrudescence of Islamic intolerance, which is poisoning in Australia, in other countries that are bringing in lots of migrants, a feeling towards Muslims. It's fear, it's anger, especially with what's happening in the Middle East. How dare these people have the right to say, if you don't believe in my God, I'll take your head off? How do you explain this present phenomenon, and is there a way through it?
I'm not sure that it's a recrudescence. I think intolerance has been an all too familiar companion in every religious tradition throughout its history. We do live in an era, on the one hand, where we hear about things and see images of things in an instant, which was not true even 40, much less 400 years ago. When I look, forgive me, at the lead up to the election that recently took place in the United States, the presidential election, you may have heard about it. One of the things that struck me with respect to the media is that in their eagerness to find viewers or readers, they would almost with pride trot out the most outrageous things that would be said by a particular presidential candidate, as opposed to, it wasn't even a matter of balance or shut him down. They gave a voice to all of the ugliness, all of the ugliest of uglinesses of which Americans, like Australians, because we are both humans, can be capable of. I think I left a preposition dangling at the end there, forgive me. But I'm not sure that it's the same, we simply have the same fight to fight that those of us who don't think that way have always had to fight. It's just that the battlefield is larger. When the Greeks and the Trojans fought at Troy, the same issues were being fought about as are being fought about in the Middle East today. But the kind of weapons they had, and therefore the number of people who got killed, were infinitesimal compared to what happens today. It's part of what scarred humanity in the 20th century. Why were the 20s a decade of roaring? I say not with jubilation over the end of the Great War, but we were running from ourselves because of what the Great War showed us about our emotional and psychological and spiritual immaturity in spite of the greater technological and scientific maturity that we'd achieved in the previous 150 years, and that we could do horrible and not just good things with science, technology, and industry. And of course, the Great War proves to be the mini-war compared to the following one. In the Great War, soldiers were being gassed. In the following war, civilians were being gassed. So the volume and our ability to know what's going on has just exponentially increased. I'm not sure that the essence of what those of us who are like that and those of us who are not like that has changed, which means those of us who are not like that just have a much tougher battle to fight, but we cannot desist from fighting that battle. Thank you for the question.
We've got time for one more? We'll take one more up the back.
Oh.
Thanks for taking my question. If I may, I have a comment and a question as well. My comment is to John. Anyway, in beginning of his speech, he mentioned about 200 years of history
Yes.
that Australia has. That's why spirituality may be different compared to some thousands of years
Right.
culture civilizations. I'm an architect, and I find many of modern buildings have much more spirituality. Even I could compare them with thousands of years of place of worship. One example is a church. It's a Church of Light, designed by Todoando. It's basically a concrete and glass building, nothing else. And just one aspect of the building, which is a cross opening within a massive concrete wall, so it lets light inside. That turns the space into a very simple and beautiful interior space. So a light through a cross concrete opening. And one other question, I mean, as an architect, I always would like to design a building that brings three religions, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. If such a space would be designed, what, as a person that has knowledge on these three religions, what sort of space would you imagine?
Well, you brought up the
As a concept.
Yes. Well, you brought up the subject of light. And that, of course, is richly shared in all three traditions as a symbol of God's presence. So I would certainly make an effort to include light as an important part of what I was doing. And then perhaps, I might do something along the lines of what Zendaruti did with that work, which is to say, fashion the light so that it assumes the shape of symbols that are particularly recognizable from these three traditions. That would be my starting point. And then I'd spend some time, of course, at Sydney Opera House. And I'd look at what the Danish architect did there and think, how can I apply that soaring space with some of that symbolic language in a way that would connote the spirituality of all three traditions? That would be my starting point, off the top of my head. Could we have one more question?
Thank you for your presentation.
Sure.
I guess I have a couple of questions that relate to the same theme. I'm currently undertaking my PhD on the Australian Shia identity, and I wanted to get your opinion on whether or not you think that, considering the current climate, not only within the Middle East but at a global level, do you find that people are clinging on to their religious identities a lot more than what they were, or that they're actually doing the opposite of that? And also, you know, we've talked a lot about intolerance between faiths. I want to kind of get your opinion on intolerance within independent faiths, and I'm specifically referring to the Sunni Shia debate. From my experience, it's become almost impossible to have a genuine, open, respectful discussion between different sects without it getting very emotional.
Yes.
What would your advice be to kind of encourage that kind of dialogue?
There's a woman I know at an institution in the Upper West part of New York State, where I have for the last many years been doing lectures 1 or 2 weeks over the course of their summer. And that institution, the Chautauqua Institution, began a very strong effort at the end of the 90s, this was before 2001, to bring more Muslims into their arena. It had begun Chautauqua as a Methodist Bible study camp. It became pan-Protestant. By after World War I, it included Catholics. By after World War II, a lot of Jews became involved, and the idea was we should bring the third leg of the Abrahamic tradition into this, and she was concerned because, you know, the Muslims are taking over, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And some of the speakers who have been brought there, she didn't approve of. And she had a conversation with me, and I said to her, look, talking may lead nowhere, but if you don't talk, you're guaranteed to get nowhere. So the first part of that long-winded answer to your question, I suppose, would be that we need to try to talk. And I think it's important to try to explore and explain, and it's not easy for everyone to get this, the difference between true and false dialogue. Dialogue often is the mask for, I really want to convert you to my point of view, or vice versa. And I may not even realize that that's what I'm doing when we have our conversation, or you don't realize it. True dialogue is when that's not what's involved. It's about caritas, it's about mahaba, it's about ahava, it's about love, it's about exploring the endless range and variety of ways in which we approach the same phenomenon called God. And maybe it just means starting with a few people, and maybe it means over tea, and maybe it means in a non-official kind of setting, and hope that that sort of spreads. That's what the Hizmet movement began as. It wasn't a lot of people. It was people who were listening to Fethullah Gulen preach on Friday sermons in Izmir. And then it spread, and it spread because his words resonated with more and more and more and more people. And the people who were involved directly and indirectly with Hizmet are not limited to Turkish Sunni Muslims. They are, as he would himself say, it includes atheists. Atheists are doing God's work, even if they don't know that it's God's work they're doing, if they're doing Hizmet. So I don't want to be Pollyannish about it. I don't want to say, oh, well, but one has to start with that sort of attempt. And one cannot be discouraged by the fact that it's not necessarily easy, and that, as you say, intra-faith, there are suspicions and complications, to say nothing of interfaith. One has to just keep pushing slowly, little by little. Thank you very much.
Unfortunately, we have run out of time. I'm sure Ori may be available for a few minutes conversation afterwards if any of you have desperate questions. And just in your last answer, Ori, I'm reminded of two of the seminal events of the Destroyer television. One was Kenneth Clark's great series Civilization, in which he ended with a simple comment on manners. That's the way we enter into dialogue. And the other comment was at the end of a similar series by Ronald Eyre called The Long Search, and he ended with a tea ceremony. Just the simple act of sharing tea. And thank you for bringing us to that point today in this discussion. we'd like to thank you for being with us. There's a small presentation we have for you, and I'd like Elizabeth Coombs, the Privacy Commissioner, to present you with a small gift today as a token. And there are people we have to thank today, particularly the sponsor of today's event, Ken Salagic, Managing Director of Salix Limited. Unfortunately, Ken can't be with us, but I'd like to call on Amit Pola to deliver a final vote of thanks today and conclude the program. Amit.
Thank you, John. Uncle or cousin? Cousin John, thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, my newly extended families, cousin, uncles, aunties, and thank you. As the Executive Director of Affinity Intercultural Foundation, I would like to thank each and every one of you for joining us for the last luncheon of 2016, as a luncheon of the 2016. For the people who are here for the first time, welcome, and we are fortunate to have made such amazing friends. And for our old friends, welcome again, and thank you for your continued support and encouragement over the years. At Affinity, we aim to provide and facilitate an open forum where there is a representation from a wide range of voice, and there is conversation on a wide range of issues important to our whole community. Today's topic, well, has no doubt touched all of our hearts, and I would like to sincerely thank Professor Ori Soltes, I'm going to call him my cousin, for visiting us all of the way from USA and sharing his knowledge and insight. Professor Soltes, my new cousin from USA, has been a pleasure to be with over the past few days. A genuine and dynamic man. His ideas and conversation are both thought-provoking and intellectual, exciting. Fantastic. We are blessed to have him here with us today, and we look forward to seeing him again, and possible in near future, like next year. Particularly in Sydney, we see you as a Sydney-sider now, Ori. And John Cleary is another key figure of today's conversation. As Rosemary mentioned, my cousin Rosemary mentioned, John Cleary is one of the Australian best known and most highly respected commentators on religion. Well, today, as well as thanking him from my bottom of my heart for chairing our lunch, would like to take the opportunity to honor him. Many of you know that he has been a presenter and producer with ABC Radio Television for some 30 years. And in that time, he has become an important and significant figure in the intercultural, interfaith dialogue to which many of us in this room are committed. He has played a lead role in ensuring that religion is part of the national conversation and in fostering recognition that it plays a central part in creating a successful multicultural democracy. Most particularly through the program he has presented for the last 15 years, Sunday Nights. Sunday Nights has been a weekly program for a broad, non-specialist audience engaging the general public in the discussion of religion and ethics, and beliefs and values as they shape the big social and political issues of our times. Creating a forum where religious leaders and people from faith-based backgrounds can create a national conversation about things that matter to us. Whether we are talking about the developing religions literacy or we are talking about the big social issues and challenges we face in 2016, religious leaders and religious organizations are often the primary players and the primary advocates, with a range of views and possible solutions to put out there. Some of us may have been in the studio with John on a Sunday night, being part of a panel, being interviewed or phoned in. Sunday nights has been what many of us here and many of people across Australia and our week with. So it is with great sadness that despite the program's popularity, we have learned that the ABC has decided that Sunday nights is to be decommissioned and program will not be running next year. So John, we want to thank you for the contribution you have made to the discussion of religion in Australia, public life, and the interfaith and intercultural dialogue over so many years. And to bringing these issues and our diverse voices to a wide audience. We should acknowledge that your program was the first media in Australia to put forward more nuanced coverage of the attempt coup in Turkey earlier this year, and we thank you for your knowledge and expertise in being able to do this. So I would like to call up Dr. Sister Giovanni. It's an honor, privilege to invite you to stage. And she is Executive Director of the Archdiocese of Sydney's Commission of Ecumenical and Interfaith Relations to present a small gift to John Cleary on behalf of Affinity as a token of our appreciation. Please, Sister Giovanni. It's a great surprise for you, Sister Giovanni. And all gifts from my uncle's shop, ladies and gentlemen.
This is a most unexpected honor. I was not expecting that. But
You deserve that to present dessert person in Australia. It's a pleasure.
we are old friends. Yes.
Indeed we are.
Yes.
Sister Giovanni, thank you so much.
All cousins. Before finishing, there is another one. I would like to thank Mr. Emre Çelik. I think his outgoing personality speaks for itself. Beginning of the program, yes, they announced you. A true Aussie at heart, we are honored to have him back here with us. His efforts over the past few months in organizing this 4-day speaking tour have been enormous, and this program wouldn't have been able to happen without his and the Ruby Forum's support. Thank you, Emre, and for being a delight to work with you. I would like to call upon Professor Anne Brewer, Dean, the University of Newcastle, Sydney, to present a small Turkish delight to him. It's from my uncle's shop as well. Would you like to say a couple of words, Professor Anne and Professor Anne?
Well, it's like Sister said, it's a great honour to make this presentation, and I think a great honour and a great privilege to have listened to Ori's presentation today. It's something that I think will stay with all of us for a very long time. Thank you.
Of course, I want to thank the speakers and the facilitator. I'm just amazed with all these cousins. I feel like I'm at a Turkish or a Lebanese wedding. So thank you to all our cousins for turning up. By virtue of the fact that Ahmed is a very, very warm individual. He sees people as cousins, as brothers and sisters. And in many of my talks, I address the issue of the fact that I believe, and I think many of you that support Affinity and similar organisations, I've been based in DC the last 8 years, previously Sydney, Brisbane and Melbourne. I think there are two types of people in this world, and I think this is the attitude that the Ahmeds of the world uphold, and that is friends and potential friends. So I think this is an important attitude, and I wish you all well in your endeavour, or our endeavour together on this path. Thank you.
Lastly, I haven't forgotten our esteemed advisory board member, Professor Rosemary. I think she's left. Okay, so I can, yes, and sincerely thank for her continuous support of our activities. As I mentioned, that this is our final luncheon of this year, and we may not see you again this year around this type of programs. I wish you all a joyful festive season in advance, and look forward to seeing you all next year. As we had announced in Parliament Iftar Dinner early this year, we will be launching our new name and our merge with a few other dialogue organizations in Australia early next year. Please watch out for the invitations, and we hope to see all of you, our friends here. Have a good afternoon. Thank you so much.